The sun is even higher now, but although the road is still bright, the glow is toned down substantially by Dobbs' latest addition, a pair of Bono-style shades. Both Dobbs and Agent 6 are returning to the hotel after coffee. As they arrive, a taxi pulls up next to them. Here comes trouble, Dobbs thinks to himself. Peering inside, he sees a pretty Latino babe wearing designer shades. She's skimpily dressed and waving to Agent 6. Beside her, in the shaded recess of the battered-looking car, his saxophone round his neck and beaming the naughtiest grin, is the Brigadier. Dobbs leans down and gestures greetings with a smile and a cheeky raising of the eyebrows in salute to what must have been a fruitful night. The Brigadier and the girl are speaking animatedly in Spanish. He has no clue what is being said, but he assumes it to be a farewell conversation. The Brigadier speaks fluent Spanish and loves taking the simplest of conversations to the most complex of lingual arenas. He wouldn't think twice to correct anything said wrongly by relaying the simple 14 steps in qualifying and applying a conjugation. It's quite amazing what 5 years in a foreign jail can do for your linguistic abilities. In no time they're all up in the hotel room and huge rails of pestilence are lined up on the table. Time for judgment gets stuck on the back burner, prudence thrown to the wind. In for a penny, Dobbs figures. There's no extra points for cash back for clean upholstery when the car finally goes to the scrapper. Well done for saving yourself, oh pure one, he thinks to himself as the first rail disappears up the 50 solly note and into his nostril. All aboard the locomotive, Agent 6 shrieks. He braces himself for a toxic burn, which is normally followed by, oh, that's really fucking smooth, whether it's like snorting a chainsaw or not. But to Dobbs' surprise, it really is quite smooth. He literally feels it running round his arteries and the intense toxicity of what feels like fingers of ice contracting round his heart. No matter how deep he breathes, each breath feels shallower and shallower as his heart centre shuts down and something else inflates. Suddenly Dobbs is the centre of the world, yet somehow a little disempowered all at the same instant. A few more lines though and he's flying. An hour later, they're all walking down the road with their bags as the hotel where they've been staying doesn't have any larger rooms until tomorrow. Dobbs comes to a halt suddenly, watching the Brigadier as he really sketchily stashes a bottle of ammonia in a tree right by the side of the road. It's broad daylight. Dobbs turns to Agent 6 and, trying to be as audible as possible to the Brigadier, says, "So what's this then? A clever trick to look really dodgy, or just something to make me feel like I'm hanging out with a guy who's got a serious fucking rock frenzy going on?" "Don't want to be caught with this shit," the Brigadier fires back. Dobbs is not so innocent as to know looking as guilty as fuck standing on the side of the street and stashing such paraphernalia in broad daylight probably isn't the best card to play. "Just give it here for fuck's sake," he demands, making light of the Brigadier's paranoia. Within a few minutes they're standing outside another hotel that Agent 6 had booked a little earlier. It has a distinctly Mexican vibe about it, and a much smaller front than the previous place, though it goes back considerably further. The building is clearly from a much older period, but beautifully maintained. Its lavish white walls are swathed in a tropical greenery, and a gabled porch adorned with terracotta tiles with its own little front gate leading to the main entrance. The thick, chunky oak uprights that support the porch area, aged to a deep, dark, solid finish, lend it an air of authentic antiquity, whilst a battered old Corvette sits out the front, bathed in bright sunlight, transforming the whole scene as though some prop in a movie set. Still feeling expansive from their earlier horse doses of pestilence, they take what is more of a suite than a room, and in no time at all the Brigadier is in the kitchen, cooking up a fuss. Agent 6, who's watching him intently, removes his Che Guevara army cap and runs one hand through his damp hair. He turns and stares at Dobbs, but his mind is clearly somewhere else, wondering where this is all going perhaps. Dobbs tries not to let it concern him too much though, and accept it as just another scene in the adventure. His world has already been turned on its head. What's this going to be in the grand scheme of things? The Brigadier is lighting tailor-made cigarettes, and rather than smoking them, he's placing them carefully upright, balancing them on their filter ends like tiny factory smokestacks. "Got to be smoked on a bed of ash, you see," he says. Dobbs hasn't quite worked it all out yet. "That sounds more culinary than it really looks," he responds. The Brigadier just gathers up all the ash on a piece of paper and is now fumbling for a lighter, and Dobbs remembers he's bought some clever little LED light that has a mini blowtorch on the end. "Seems there's no irony they're called crack lighters then," Dobbs says as he passes it over. The Brigadier fills the spoon with pestilence, then floods it with ammonia and carefully places it so it hangs over the side of the table before weighing down the handle with an empty cup. Then he starts heating the mixture with the intensely hot lighter. He nods at Dobbs. "Nice," he says, obviously expecting him to beam the same enthusiasm. Within a few moments, the mixture starts bubbling and a waxy residue appears floating on the top. He carefully stirs it with a wooden toothpick, and the residue starts attaching itself to the end. Within a minute or two it has all attached itself, and then he tips the remaining liquid down the sink and replaces it with water, gently washing away the toxic ammonia. Dobbs watches every move attentively. "Gotta wash it well, not good for you, that shit," the Brigadier grunts, observing his interest. "Yeah, no kidding," Dobbs retorts. The Brigadier pulls out a pipe, fills it with a small bed of ash, then scrapes some of the dry crystalline residue off the side of the pick and sprinkles it over the top of the ash. "Dobbs!" he commands. Dobbs is now absolutely fascinated by the whole process. He is keen to smoke some refined pestilence and at last get some idea of what the fuss is all about. He's still never done it. Has he missed out? Only one way to find out. "Draw slowly and hold it down," the Brigadier enthuses, his piercing blue eyes scrutinising Dobbs as he fumbles with the proffered pipe. Since it's smoked in much the same way, Dobbs is half expecting it to be like a DMT hit, to be blown almost clean out of this world, so much so that someone has to hold the pipe for you as you blast off. But it's quite the opposite effect, really. Like pestilence, only much more intense. As the cold white flash spreads rapidly through his body, he begins to feel more and more distant from his emotions, and for a moment he wonders if his heart is going to stop altogether. He doesn't feel good at all, and he certainly doesn't look that good either, as he can feel all the colour draining from his face. The Brigadier, he knows, is hooked on this substance now, and once the sensation of imminent cardiac arrest has passed, he catches himself almost pitying his friend. But then with an almost physical effort he shakes it off. Any man who feels pity for another's direct choices would be best to go and hang out with born-again Christians in the jungle, telling the indigenous to repent their sins. He chides himself. Shuddering at the thought, he projects it away from himself, attempting to disown his own guilt at even having had it. Instead, he turns to the Brigadier. All those horrid judgmental cretins in the West, addicted to their sugar, their alcohol, wheat, Prozac, sleeping pills, caffeine, nicotine, and the worst addiction of all, of course, TV, the ultimate life-taker. Imagine being sentenced to a life of dead-enders. Years and years of wonderful life lost staring in a fucking box. Poor bastards. Expressionless faces just staring into oblivion. Truly the opiate of the masses. The Brigadier gives a scouring smile and nods with enthusiasm as he takes the pipe off Agent 6 and begins loading it. Agent 6 says nothing but just looks at Dobbs, who's racking up more lines on the tabletop as he feels his energy spiralling downwards. Scouring their daily hate rags, thumbing through the sins of the world and all their shitty non-existing excuses for politics, as if such stupid left and right wing nonsense ever really made any sense. When you live in a reality where you only have to turn 180 degrees and everything that was on the left becomes right. Really, when it comes to the left and the right, we've all only been in the middle. A whole crock of shite designed exclusively for fences. You can exterminate millions of innocent people, carry out mass genetic cleansing by dumping thousands of times more nuclear waste than the Hiroshima bomb on whoever you fucking like, in the form of depleted uranium bombshells. Bombshells of redemption. Bring down skyscrapers, anything you like in their name, and as long as that TV's on, they'll concede to genocide and war because they can't press the off button. Their minds just bombarded with nonsense. A whole media control mechanism cleverly designed to get the masses to sit on the fence, trapped between the false choice of one total crock of shite or another, in a non-existent existential dimension, a digital world that extracts the masses' presence from themselves and delivers the governments all they ever needed. The masses' unwavering, silent consent to wage war. Wankers! Dobbs stops for a moment, lining up more rails, then, bloody hell, he continues, this stuff's mad. Hitler used to do loads of this shit, didn't he? One line of this and I become a totally self-righteous evangelist myself. It's the finger of blame, isn't it? Blame feels so fantastically good on this shit. No, man, you're not doing it, willing it, wanting that outcome, and nor are they, states Agent 6, who's now being presented with the next pipe. Where were you when the Iraq and Afghanistan wars kicked off? Protesting, Dobbs proclaims. Exactly. With millions of others. And where were you on the day when the towers came down? Well, at another protest actually, some demo outside a big arms fair in the Docklands. Exactly. With loads of other people. It's this stuff. You got to be careful with this shit. It brings out the judge and the jury in you. It makes you completely blind to yourself. Yeah, it's like suddenly having the eyes of a smirker with the finger of a blamer. I feel like George Bush. I don't know if I like it at all. He feels sticky and sweaty as if something poisonous is pouring out of him. It's dirty and he hates it, but he kind of likes it. He feels like he's on the other side of something, a line he sometimes straddles but never normally crosses. Oh my God, what I'm thinking about is hot, sexy Latino women. He almost apologetically exclaims, snorting back one line and then immediately racking up another. Why, you can't get enough of this, can you? He raves, then pausing for a microsecond in the mad onrush. Is that what I really think? That the masses back home really are just a bunch of fence-sitters? It's a bit harsh, I know, but it feels like that sometimes. I wonder which prominent politician will be chosen in the end to openly state that depleted uranium is safe. Imagine the weight of being told that you had to say that knowing the truth. Who will they get? Because a lot of people are talking about it and now it's not even a conspiracy theory. The masses out there just haven't quite realised the scale of the volumes involved here, but they're just beginning to grasp. It's mad. On this stuff, I'm not sad about it. I'm angry about it. And he draws out his fingers of blame as though a cowboy. I kind of like it. I got fingers of blame. A 3-hour session and a whole bag later, and it's well into the evening and getting dark outside. The Brigadier makes a call, and the next thing the pestilence is replenished, and they're sitting in a casino with Lobo, an old friend of the Brigadier they've picked up along the way. Lobo's face is soft and calming. He's wearing a plain wool hat with no distinguishing marks, and is very casually dressed. He looks almost Native American, with a face like Chief Sitting Bull. Dobbs feels totally comfortable in his presence. They're all sitting round a roulette table, paying more trips to the bathroom than even the vast quantities of free drinks could warrant. The Brigadier is on a winning streak, but he's being careless. Lobo's playing occasionally and sparingly, as if appealing to the Brigadier's calm and attempting to settle him somehow. Agent 6 leans towards Dobbs. Lobo got lucky. The Brigadier and him served time in an Italian jail. One can only guess certain ingredients have played a part in it, he whispers, nodding at Dobbs and simultaneously winking at Lobo. But Lobo got on some reform program, where you go and work, farming the land. He got paid as well, saved enough money to buy a farm for him and his family when he got out 4 years later. Lobo, the wolf. Generally called upon as a liaison between corrupt officials and gringos who just happen to have lost all their belongings. Luckily, the insurance should cover it. Speaks 8 languages, does our Lobo. Dobbs just smiles at the other man, observing his winning streak. Both he and the Brigadier are building a huge pile of chips, but despite Lobo's attempts to subtly pacify him, the Brigadier is beginning to look even more reckless and wild. Dobbs is barely playing at all. He's so stoked on the pestilence that the only thing he's really interested in is the incredibly well-formed body of the hostess with the mostess, who's been granted the uneviable task of waiting their table. Noticing his attention, she turns and gestures with her tray to inquire if he wants a drink, but the only response he can manage is to look her up and down in a sleazy approval of her skimpily clad figure. She turns totally unimpressed and just walks away. Dragging his attention back to the table, Dobbs becomes aware that despite the pleasure of the reunion and the general attitude of abandonment, there's a strange energy between the 3 old friends tonight. It's as if they all know that this is somehow not the same Brigadier they all know and love, but don't want to admit it to themselves. Just as the thought forms in Dobbs's head, though, the Brigadier looks up sharply, as if suddenly becoming aware of the unwelcome attention. Catching Dobbs observing him, his icy blue eyes narrow and he pointedly returns the stare. "You're round, Dobbs," he states. His voice is cold and flat, and Dobbs is momentarily stunned by the order. "Give us 50 solis," he demands, ignoring Dobbs and placing his chips like a general strategically planning a great battle as the ball spins round and round, audibly slowing. But the croupier raises his hand and pushes them back off. Dobbs looks to see how things have gone, although taking little interest overall. A pile of chips is pushed towards Lobo and the Brigadier. It seems they're both on a roll. Catching the Brigadier's eyes, Agent 6 gives a barely noticeable signal and they scoop up their chips. Agent 6 has played like Dobbs, barely at all, and mostly with the aim of just enjoying the game rather than making money. Not the tactics of a gambler at all, just someone looking for a little distraction from the weight of other thoughts. After a few goodbyes and a little wheeling and dealing on the way home, they're back in the hotel room, and out comes the ammonia again. Dobbs's head is already whirling from the effects of all the chemicals and alcohol running through his system. He goes straight to his bed, downs a whole bottle of water, then lying down, pulls his sheets over him and closes his eyes. It's clear to all he's bailed out for the night, but whatever noises of protest the others are making is nothing to the reckless chaos in his head. He wishes he had some Valium to quell the screaming hysteria and twisted torments of his mind in its withdrawal from the pestilence. But he hasn't. Time goes by agonizingly slowly, each moment dragging like fingernails down a blackboard. He knows sleep is probably hours away, but he needs to step off the locomotive. Whatever they get from it, he clearly doesn't. It just feels toxic. When he finally opens his eyes, it's early morning and Agent 6 and the Brigadier have just arrived back from another excursion. Agent 6 looks sad and pale as though about to break down in tears. The Brigadier seems gaunt and almost broken. Dobbs knows he cannot go near either of them. Then it all reaches a head. The Brigadier, who's almost hemorrhaging sadness, looks like a submarine that's gone too deep and is imploding under the pressure. Something's obviously happened, as a good night shouldn't end like this. Agent 6 hugs the Brigadier, but somehow not so much with a feeling of union, as almost a way of saying farewell. Then they both retreat to their beds. Dobbs, watching the moment, feels a chill go through his body. Contradictory to his present actions, Agent 6 actually disapproves of pestilence, in fact of drug abuse in general. It's not so much that he feels one shouldn't indulge at all, as just exercise moderation and recognise that when the party's over, it's over. No regrets, just pick up the pieces and move on. The Brigadier, however, is lost to it all now. Agent 6 just doesn't seem to have much time for it anymore. Although they've shared a lot of history, and despite everything, he obviously still hopes he might pull out of it. But pestilence is like a credit card. You can keep drawing all the feel-good factors from your life, and never paying off the bill until suddenly you realise you've maxed out, and you finally have to come down. That's the moment every junkie dreads, because by then all that's left is emptiness and vast sadness. Dobbs feels very awake. The whirling pitch of withdrawal has all but gone, and he feels surprisingly normal now. Almost a little smug for having been able to bail out and pull the ripcord. He decides to take a wander down to the promenade. It's another fresh morning. He snakes the winding path through the manicured lawns and gardens, up along the Miraflora cliff edge, where all the new high-rises are going up, looking out to sea. He can see the surfers are already out in the swirl. It's still early though, and apart from a few joggers, the only other people about are the armed guards watching over various crews of what he assumes to be convict workers. It must be a better way for prisoners to spend their days than cooped up in cells, Dobbs thinks to himself, if they are indeed prisoners. It all seems very beautiful and tranquil compared to the previous night's activities. Miraflora's waterfront is a beautiful botanical promenade with winding paths that take Dobbs through no end of flower beds and looking points. He fills his lungs with the fresh sea air and can taste the aromas of the new day, even through his pummeled olfactory receptors. He feels the adventure of South America again, and draws sweet fresh breath right down into the depths of his heart, which despite the battering it's taken, is now coming back online. A few hours later and he's making his way back to the first hotel with the others, only this time into a bigger room as Bolivar is due later on that night or early the next morning. He's done the most sensible thing he can think of and picked up a pack of Valium from the drugstore on the quiet. He knows they may prove handy, and not just for long bus rides. He catches his reflection in the mirror on the way into the room. Strands of grey hair shine in the mid-afternoon light. He's getting older, he thinks to himself as he stops to examine his reflection. They're all getting older. Even the Brigadier, who with his pale skin, blonde hair and blue eyes, Dobbs has always credited with the kind of complexion that never really seems to age. The serious pestilence abuse is taking its toll on him now though, Dobbs thinks to himself. He's looking noticeably older, and his forehead is always spotted with those telltale tiny beads of perspiration that didn't seem a healthy sign for a man who claims to be as fit as a fiddle. Sure, there was a time when the Brigadier could always disguise it with occasional bouts of push-ups and pull-ups, but these days the lines on his face and the discoloration of his skin are beginning to tell another story. As soon as the door is shut, he turns to Dobbs. "Give us 50 solis," he demands. The sun is even higher now, but although the road is still bright, the glow is toned down substantially by Dobbs' latest addition, a pair of Bono-style shades. Both Dobbs and Agent 6 are returning to the hotel after coffee. As they arrive, a taxi pulls up next to them. Here comes trouble, Dobbs thinks to himself. Peering inside, he sees a pretty Latino babe wearing designer shades. She's skimpily dressed and waving to Agent 6. Beside her, in the shaded recess of the battered-looking car, his saxophone round his neck and beaming the naughtiest grin, is the Brigadier. Dobbs leans down and gestures greetings with a smile and a cheeky raising of the eyebrows in salute to what must have been a fruitful night. The Brigadier and the girl are speaking animatedly in Spanish. He has no clue what is being said, but he assumes it to be a farewell conversation, The Brigadier speaks fluent Spanish and loves taking the simplest of conversations to the most complex of lingual arenas. He wouldn't think twice to correct anything said wrongly by relaying the simple 14 steps in qualifying and applying a conjugation. It's quite amazing what 5 years in a foreign jail can do for your linguistic abilities. In no time in the rooms until tomorrow. Dobbs comes to a halt suddenly, watching the Brigadier, as he really sketchily stashes a bottle of ammonia in a tree right by the side of the road. It's broad daylight. Dobbs turns to Agent 6 and, trying to be as audible as possible to the Brigadier, says, "So what's this then? A clever trick to look really dodgy, or just something to make me feel like I'm hanging out with a guy who's got a serious fucking rock frenzy going on?" "Don't want to be caught with this shit," the Brigadier fires back. Dobbs is not so innocent as to know, looking as guilty as fuck, standing on the side of the street and they're all up in the hotel room and huge rails of pestilence are lined up on the table. Time for judgment gets stuck on the back burner, prudence thrown to the wind. In for a penny, Dobbs figures. There's no extra points for cash back for clean upholstery when the car finally goes to the scrapper. Well done for saving yourself, oh pure one, he thinks to himself as the first rail disappears up the 50 solly note and into his nostril. "All aboard the locomotive," Agent 6 shrieks. He braces himself for a toxic burn, which is normally followed by, "Oh, that's really fucking smooth," whether it's like snorting a chainsaw or not. But to Dobbs' surprise, it really is quite smooth. He literally feels it running round his arteries and the intense toxicity of what feels like fingers of ice contracting round his heart. No matter how deep he breathes, each breath feels shallower and shallower as his heart centre shuts down and something else inflates. Suddenly Dobbs is the centre of the world, yet somehow a little disempowered all at the same instant. A few more lines though and he's flying. An hour later, they're all walking down the road with their bags, as the hotel where they've been staying doesn't have any larger